The scariest experiment in human history, bringing the dead back to life, so that humans can defeat death. And the result of this human obsession with becoming immortal was this Frankenstein. So you must know this monster. But maybe you don't know at all that actually, this was not a monster. Even this was pure vegetarian. What was its real origin, and where did it come from? If you know this, then you will be shocked. So today we are going to know the real story of Frankenstein, and we will also know whether Frankenstein was really real. And we will know how, because of a crazy scientist, we revealed every secret of it. And today it's Frankenstein's turn. And should I say Frankenstein's? Don't go on pronunciation. Say whatever you want. Just understand the emotions. Get ready quickly, because we are about to walk into a dark night where lightning was flashing in the sky, and Frankenstein was coming to life. Answer to this lies in the experiment that should never have been performed in history. Many children nowadays believe that an experiment like Frankenstein must have happened many years ago, based on which movies and cartoons everyone watches nowadays. But the truth is something else. And the truth is not that simple. It's very dark. And this dark theory begins in 1817. That was the year when an experiment was done that gave birth to Frankenstein. 1818, the world first saw a book called Frankenstein. It was written by Mary Shelley. And here, a Victor Frankenstein, named scientist, and say, a son in an attempt to defeat death, creates a strange creature. And the hatred and contempt of humans, together, turn that creature into a monster. This John Velli was there. This was not fiction, it was based on reality. Frankenstein was not just a figment of the imagination. It was a mirror to the horrific scientific obsession of that era. If you don't know, then let me tell you that in the year 1818, across Europe, there were some inventions and such discoveries, or rather such experiments happening, that would make your soul tremble upon hearing them. This was the time known as the Age of Enlightenment, where humans, placing themselves in God's place, began to challenge the mysteries of life and death. People began to believe that, with some formula or vital force, dead people could be brought back to life. Electricity, chemicals, and the human body. Combining these three, such bizarre experiments were happening, whose only purpose was to achieve immortality. And in this process, in 1817, German neural philosopher Carl August conducted an experiment which directly resembled the story of Frankenstein. He removed the brain of his small cat, although that cat had died, and in that dead cat's body, instead of the brain, two metal plates, zinc and silver plates, were attached. And then he gave an electric shock, and that cat's skull became a living, breathing battery. And you will be shocked to know that by doing so, that cat opened its eyes. It fluttered a little, stood for a while, and then fell, died forever. For anyone who witnessed this scene, it was no less than a nightmare. But this experiment by Carl August Weinhold lit a lamp of hope in people's hearts, that by giving electric shocks to the dead, people can be brought back to life. And this was not the only experiment. Another theory had created a stir throughout Europe: galvanism. It was named after Italian scientist Luigi Galvani, who discovered in the 1780s that when a dead frog's leg is subjected to electricity, it suddenly twitches. And this experiment to an ordinary person, it was no less than black magic for Kelly. Scientists have found more proof that perhaps electricity is the key to life. So basically, All this was going on in Europe at that time, and all these events gave birth to a story like Frankenstein, which Mary wrote in her novel. But until now, no scientist has ever done this experiment on humans. So how did Mary get the idea that a human could be brought back to life by giving them electric shocks? So this whole incident was the work of George Forster, who made it possible to perform such an experiment, who actually laid the real foundation for the story of Frankenstein. The year was 1817. The date was December 5th. The place was London, and it was 4:30 in the evening, where a man named George Foster was with his wife and daughter on a track near a canal, was going, and when the next morning a man named George Actic took his boat, went to the Beddington River. He felt something hit his boat, looked closely, that he was so nervous that he reached straight to the police. When the police investigated, they found a dead body floating in the river, and that dead body was of George Foster's same daughter, with whom he was here the evening before. Was walking around a little more searching was done. George Foster's wife, inside the stomach. All the nails were found, meaning George's brother took everyone near the canal and disposed of them. Now George Foster was immediately arrested on the charge of murdering his wife and daughter. Immediately arrested was done. He was also prosecuted, and he was quickly punished, was given, that too of hanging. Although this George Foster was a little bit of a powerful type of man, so many people recommended that his punishment should be reduced a little, and then he should get a little leniency. But nothing like that happened, and at the same time the hanging. After being hanged, his body was given a crazy eccentric scientist so that he can conduct some experiments on the corpse. However, I am using words like crazy and eccentric today. I am at that time, he was a very famous scientist. His body was kept in the lab for scientific experiments. On a cold January night, big scientists, researchers, and journalists gathered to witness this horrific experiment. And this experiment was being performed by Dr. Aldini. He connected George Foster's body to a powerful battery. 2 electrodes were placed on his face, and within seconds, George's jaw dropped open. Silence fell all around at the sight of this. Suddenly, George's left eye opened. He sat up and started flailing his arms and legs like that. Literally this scene. Seeing this, people started running here and there. Some people, leaving the experiment halfway, they ran away. Now Aldini, with his experiment, had not brought any dead person to life. It was just that George's body was reacting due to the electric shock. But this sight was so terrifying that George's, a special man who had recommended in court that George's punishment should be reduced a little. That man George's, this dance of destruction, the scene of moving his hands and feet, he got so scared after seeing that he had a heart attack right there, and he died. Now, this experiment failed because George did not come back to life. But this story became quite famous in Europe, and Mary noticed this story. He wrote a story after understanding the whole sentence, whose main character was Frankenstein. So by now, you must have understood that Frankenstein was not real. He was a character in a novel. But Frankenstein, as we know him through the movies, was he really like that? A monster? This novel named Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley, was not just a horror novel. It was the biggest story of that era, which raised big questions on both science and religion had given. And this novel, science fiction, also laid the foundation on the surface. This story seems to be about a scary monster. But as you go deeper into this story, you connect with its characters and you you find out what all happened with Frankenstein. Then, you too will feel sympathy for this creature. And the question will come to your mind, who was the real monster? That creature or the scientist who created it? Whose name was Victor Frankenstein? Yes, Frankenstein is not the name of a creature or a monster. That was the name of the scientist who performed this entire experiment. And that creature, that structure he created, left to die alone in this cruel world. As you have seen in the movies, a tall, heavy-bodied creature with bolts sticking out of his neck, who walks staggering and mostly speaks little. This had become the image of Frankenstein. But believe me, when you read Mary Shelley's written novel, then, after reading the description of the real Frankenstein, your mind will be blown. It was so much frighteningly written. The only purpose behind creating this creature was to bring dead humans back to life. But when this thing appeared to slip out of the scientist's hands, he left that creature in this world without love or belonging. The hatred and contempt of humans made him such a monster that people look at him with fear. Actually, Frankenstein was not a monster. He was quite intelligent. He was a vegetarian. All he needed was a little love and belonging. And I am not saying these things from my mind. All these things were written in a borrowed moment. And this was the very first story written about Frankenstein. So we can consider this the origin story of Frankenstein. This whole story of Mary teaches us just one thing, that the real monster is human behavior. And Mary's own life was full of many tragedies. Mary's mother died as soon as she was born. When Mary got married, her children also died at a young age, and her husband also died by drowning. So there were quite a lot of tragedies. There was a lot of loneliness in Mary's life, and this loneliness gave birth to this character, who was also struggling with loneliness. But don't worry too much, because the video is over. Frankenstein's origin story, too. And I hope that you enjoyed listening to this story. Like and subscribe to the channel. So that's it for today's video. I'll see you in next awesome video.